Let's talk about Chapter 4. Chapter 4 is on effective listening. What a great and practical chapter. I can't think of anything that would be more practical for a person than learning to listen effectively. And there is an art to it, and it's just as important as learning to speak. And if we can master the art of listening effectively, we do become better speakers. Your book threw out a study done by Adler and Proctor in 2013 that mentions only 35%. You only retain 35% of what you hear after 8 hours of hearing it. So it's super important that we learn to listen for information and informational listening, where we want to gather that information, that knowledge that we need. And then you want to work on critical listening, and that's where you're listening to be able to form an opinion on something. But listening goes way beyond that, and there's this relational aspect of listening that is so important in our lives. And listening within a relationship is an act of kindness. I love the caption that your book has. It says, mindful listening is one of the greatest gifts that we can give each other. When you take the time to set aside all the distractions, set aside your phone and set aside your work, and to be with someone and just listen. Now, to be with someone and to just listen, you have to think about the illustration your book included of the Chinese character for listening, and how it includes 3 aspects. And it involves your ears, but not just your ears. It involves your eyes and also your heart. And I know you can see where the heart would be involved, but also thinking about the eyes and how important it is that we can see the person that we're communicating with, to be able to pick up on nonverbal cues and to be able to pick up on signs that they need to relay without words. And in order to convey those emotions and receive those emotions, to be able to see that person, and how important that is in communication and listening effectively. The book says, the quote by Zeno of Citium, an ancient philosopher, and this quote was also mentioned in our discussion board last week, says, we have been given 2 ears, but a single mouth, in order that we may listen more and talk less. And I just love that idea. And then, of course, your book goes into the negative aspects and things that they termed non-listening, but actually, physiologically, you probably are hearing the message, but you are choosing rather to not engage in listening. And so the book has several different categories of non-listening, and they start with pseudo-listening and fake listening, pretending to listen. So non-verbally, you look like you're listening. You may look like you're taking notes in class, but actually you're writing your grocery list. And yes, I've been guilty of that before. I'm not sure how you could pseudo-listen to this lecture unless you just hit play and walk away. But I'm not sure if I would be able to interpret that feedback in enough time to change my message. You can monopolize the conversation when you listen, and that's when you listen but you interrupt, or you listen and reroute the conversation back to what you want to talk about. You can be selective in your listening. The book talks about how you are trying to preserve yourself, and so if you don't want to hear that message, you just leave out that part and you pick and choose what you want to selectively hear. Or you can engage in defensive listening. And this is where you perceive something that wasn't even intended in the conversation. We can get caught up in this defensive listening through text messages and through emails, because we might not hear the tone of voice that it was said, or the jest that it was mentioned, or we may not see the person's emotion as they are sending the message to us, but rather we read into it, and it was not meant that way, but defensively we listened incorrectly. And then the last one is ambushing, and this is aggressive, and maybe going into a communication scenario with a significant other, and you are on the attack, and so you are just going to listen barely listen, only to gather ammunition that you will use against that person. And so this is not listening in the Chinese sense with your heart and listening with your eyes and with your ears as an act of kindness and as a gift. So enjoy this chapter. I think it's a great chapter, not only personally, but you can use it professionally. You can use it in the academic sense. There are some great tips about thinking of who your prototype is for the ideal listener and who the standard is that you use to measure up your listening. And then there's another tip. You can listen to a podcast where someone is interviewing someone else to see, does the interviewer paraphrase? Does the interviewer use minimal encouragers? I enjoy listening to Guy Raz as he hosts his podcast, How I Built This, because he does a great job using his paraphrasing techniques and minimal encouragers to get